So the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory with all his angels, he will sit on the throne of glory. All the nations will be brought before him, and as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, so will he, placing the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. The King will say to those on his right, "Come, blessed of my Father, take possession of the kingdom prepared for you from the beginning of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me into your house. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to see me." Then the good people will ask him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and give you food? When did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and welcome you? Or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to see you?" And the King will answer, "Truly I say to you, whenever you did this to one of these little ones who are my brothers and my sisters, you did it to me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, I'd like to begin what I want to say to you tonight with a story I'm sure you may have heard before, but I think it's a very powerful story, so I'll give it to you again. It's a story told by a man called Elie Wiesel in a book which he called The Dark, and he recounts the experience he had in one of the concentration camps. It's another story from a concentration camp in World War II. A group of people were brought out to be hanged. Two of those were adults, and one of them was a teenage boy. The two adults died fairly quickly, as Wiesel tells the story. But the teenage boy, now this is a very gruesome story, the teenage boy didn't. And he was left there hanging in front of the crowd. Wiesel himself was one of the crowd of prisoners. And they were forced to watch. And it was such a terrible situation, and so hard to watch and so difficult, that Wiesel says that somebody a few feet behind him shouted out in desperation. He shouted out, "Where's God now? Where is God now?" And there was a silence. And then he said there was a silence, and that went on for a few seconds or minutes, I'm not sure. And this is the extraordinary part of this story. He said, "And then I heard within myself, as if it was a voice saying to me, 'Where's God now?' God is hanging on that tree." It's an extraordinary story, I think. And what's extraordinary about it is this, is it's a very clear statement of what Jesus himself would have said if he was there and you asked him directly. He'd say, like he said about all the other things tonight, he'd say, I'm now hanging on that tree. Because the extraordinary thing is this, that Jesus is present wherever there's extreme sickness or hunger or thirst or nakedness or people are feeling cut off. That's what he says. Wherever there's human weakness, that's where we find him. That's where you don't have to look any further. So we want to take just one of those statements tonight by Jesus, that I was hungry and you gave me food. And I'd just like to start with some facts in our world today, from basic facts. From what I can pick up, there's about 850 million people starving tonight in our world. And many of those are having the sickness of COVID as well, or are likely to get it. At the same time as those 1 in 8 people starving, it's also a fact there's about 500 million people on diet pills. And they're on diet pills because of sicknesses maybe they have picked up from overeating and the sicknesses that come from that. That's another fact. It's also a fact that the people who suffer most from hunger are also people who suffer from fear very intensely, because many of those people in the present-day world are from Syria or they're from southern Sudan. So not alone are they hungry, but they're going around full of fear in a war situation. It's also a fact, and I just want to deal with the facts for the moment. It's also a fact, according to Pope Francis and other experts, there is enough money and there is enough food in the world to feed all those people. What's lacking is the will and the facilities and the structures. It's also a fact, some other facts, that faced with these other facts, people react in different ways, just in very general terms. There are people in the world today who know these things, and thank God they care about what's happening. Thank God for that. Secondly, there are people in our world today who know those facts and they don't care. Thirdly, there are people in the world who don't know those facts and who don't care because their lives are quite superficial. They never read anything serious. They spend so much of their time reading trashy newspapers and watching soaps and wrapped up in a very, very superficial world which doesn't let them think and doesn't let them know. And if they don't think and if they don't know, how could they act? Now that's the situation of a lot of people in our world. I don't enjoy saying that. I'm not here in any way to condemn them. It's just trying to face the facts. Now, for the rest of this talk, I want to try to do or make 3 points. I want to talk, first of all, about the kind of thinking that doesn't help us to do anything in this situation. Secondly, I want to try to talk about a way of thinking that will challenge us to do something. And the third thing I want to do is maybe talk about some very practical things that we could do. First of all, there is the way we think. I think you'd agree with me. The way we think is going to affect the way we act. And there's thinking in this area about world hunger. There's negative thinking which doesn't help. And I want to deal with that first, just to mention in very broad terms some of the negative ways of thinking. Pope Francis, in his latest book, called Let Us Dream. He's quite hard and he's quite tough and he's quite strong in what he says about the attitude of indifference. Indifference is a form of living and it's a form of thinking. It's where you don't let anything difficult into your mind. You avoid looking at pain, and if you avoid looking at it, then you can avoid doing anything about it. And he talks in that book, and he mentions, you know that story in the Gospel where Jesus talks about the rich man and Lazarus at his door. And he talks about Lazarus the rich man, I should say, he sees this poor man every day, but nothing strikes him. He doesn't take anything in. He doesn't let himself feel. He's totally indifferent to this man. And he has a very strong way. I'm talking about Pope Francis, just a sentence that struck me very forcibly about this attitude of indifference. He says that it's like being bulletproofed or wearing a bulletproof vest to protect ourselves from feeling. Everything, it's a powerful way Francis puts it, everything sick or sore or hungry, whatever it is, we just let it bounce off us. It hits us all right, but it doesn't hit us at any great depth. That's the first negative thing. The second way of thinking, and it can be in us without thinking, is a kind of a despair. You know, an attitude of, sure, what's the point? Hunger was always there. Who am I? What could I do? Nothing will ever change. And I was talking to a gentleman, Mark McMahon from Trócaire, during the week, and I was just putting that point to him, that a lot of people are going to say this. And he quoted to me what Mother Teresa said. She said at one stage, I can't do very much as an individual, but I can maybe throw a stone into a river, and that will make ripples, and those ripples will make more ripples. So there's that kind of despair. And the other way of thinking, a third way of thinking, is an overemphasis on my own individual rights, and I'm my own man, and I'm my own money, and, you know, I took my chances, and mightn't say it, and somebody else, it's not my fault if they're sick or they're hungry. So it's an overemphasis on what I have done myself. To put it in blunt terms, it's a strong sense of pride, the wrong kind of pride. So those kind of thoughts and those kinds of feelings, we need to be aware of them. Maybe if the cap fits, as it were, we wear it, but we need to think that negative thinking is out there. Now, there's another form of thinking that helps us. Ways of thinking. And I think the first way, and I want to emphasize this, is when we think along the lines of what our faith says to us. And our faith, the scriptures, have very strong statements about where God stands. You know, I hope it's not heresy, but God doesn't look at everybody the same way. God says it very clearly himself, that he has a special love and he has a special care for people who are on the fringes and for people who suffer and people who are poor and people who are hungry, and he has that special love and care for them precisely because they're in great need. And our God is a God who's on the side of those who are in need. Now, it's very important to let that shape our way of thinking. This is very much in the heart of God, that this hunger, that sickness, and problems which couldn't be solved, it's God's will that we try to change them. Pope Francis, again, you'll find me quoting him a lot. I think he's an extraordinary pope. He talks about the changes he found in himself when he went to what he calls the peripheries. He found God in a special way on the periphery, in places where there was a lot of pain and suffering. Now, what I want you to note is he found God in a special way, he says, on the periphery. There's a Filipino cardinal, he's called Cardinal Tagle, was talking to a crowd of Redemptorist superiors a couple of years ago, and he said a very interesting thing. You know that story in the Gospel about St. Thomas and how he insisted that he would touch the wounds of Jesus before he would believe. Well, Cardinal Tagle says to the Redemptorist superiors that he was convinced, Cardinal Tagle, that unless you touch the wounded Jesus today, you cannot say, my Lord and my God. So with regard to our thinking then, first thing, so that we will act positively, is to realize that our God is to be found very much and very especially and particularly among the poor and the needy and the groups that we're thinking about. The second strong thought that can influence us is this, and I think we need conversion to this in all kinds of ways, is the realization that my gifts, my intelligence, my gifts of mind and heart, of body, my money, what I made and what I have isn't just for myself. Everything I have been given by God is for the sake of others, not just for myself. Now, if we could get that clear into our minds and hearts, I think it would make an awful difference to us. Another thought that would push us on would be to realize that right now we in this generation are responsible for the future. And caring for the weak, the sick, and the hungry, there's no doubt about it, is the will of God. I just want to move on now to a few practical suggestions. And the primary suggestion I want to make tonight is that we would I thought I had it there. I'll get it. Is that we would support Trócaire. You know, it's a little bit difficult for Trócaire this year in the sense that churches are closed and they usually give out their Trócaire boxes in churches, and also there's a difficulty with schools. So, you know, I would encourage you all to get the Trócaire leaflet, the whole thing that they give out every year, and get the box in there, and obviously fill in the box as well as you can and as generously as you can. Use the Trócaire box and read up what's in there, and you'll get an awful lot of very good information about what we're talking about tonight. Now, as well as the box, I had a chat again with Mr. Mark McMahon during the week, the Trócaire man here in Belfast, and I asked him, well, what other things can people do, you know, besides filling in the box, which is the major thing? He said there's all kinds of other things. Maybe people could make a donation every month, or maybe people, if they're taxpayers, you know, could let Trócaire pick up the interest on the tax. And the British government this year, he told me, and you'll find that in the Trócaire box, the British government will match Trócaire up to the tune of 2 million. So that's well worth supporting. But in addition to helping them with financial contributions, I asked him, there's other ways. He said, maybe you could go into a parish and help with the collection. Maybe in your own parish you could organise collections. There's work to be done in schools, and there's always educational facilities. So if you have any interest at all, and if you wanted to do more for Trócaire, they'd only be too willing to hear from you, and they have plenty of ideas. I can just simply notice it this evening. One or two other suggestions, and I'm nearly finished. The other suggestion is, put world hunger on your conversational agenda. Talk about it. Discuss it. Bring it up when you're discussing it with family and with friends. And Pope Francis again has two very good suggestions, maybe to talk about them. He's very strong, and he's asking world governments to set up a fund, and instead of the money that they spend on arms, which do so much damage, to put that money into a fund that would get rid of world hunger. And he says the amount of money spent on arms would cover that, and it would actually feed hungry children. Talk to people about that. Generate interest in that idea. The final suggestion I have is, maybe it's just something that struck me last week. I hope it's not too crazy. I don't think it is. We have seen in the last year or two the power of slogans. The power of the Me Too slogan. And how people in the West got around that and made an awful change to the way we look at the exploitation of women. Or more recently, we have seen the power of another slogan, the slogan which says, Black lives matter, and they do. And see the change that again has made in the West. What would you think if we could come up with another slogan and push it and talk about it? Hungry people die. Hungry people's lives matter. Whatever way you want to put it, maybe make up your own slogan. So I had a lot more to say, but it's time to stop. I just finish up then, maybe to try and take us this week for our reflection, just that sentence of Jesus, and to hear it, I was hungry, and you gave me food.